The sky was a heavy gray that afternoon, and the rain fell steadily across the wide, empty plains of the southwest. Sam. McGraw guided his horse slowly through the muddy trail, his hat pulled low over his eyes to shield him from the sheets of water. The day had been long. He had been rounding up cattle with his small herd, and now his boots were soaked and his coat weighed down by the rain. The wind carried a cold chill that sank into his bones, and he found himself wishing he could just see a warm cabin and a fire waiting at the end of the path. The landscape around him was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves against the muddy ground, the occasional splash of water in puddles, and the wind whistling through the sparse trees. Sam's mind wandered as he rode. He had lived on these plains most of his life, and he knew them better than he knew anyone. The open land had always been his home, but it was also a lonely place. He was used to solitude, yet sometimes, on days like this, the emptiness pressed against him in a way that made his heart ache. As he crested a small rise near the river, Sam saw a figure in the distance, huddled under the skeletal branches of a dying oak tree. At first, he thought it might be a trick of the rain, the way the water blurred shapes and shadows. But as he drew closer, he saw the figure clearly, a woman, soaked through, shivering, and seemingly crying. Her long hair, dark and wet, clung to her face. She held a small bundle close to her chest, rocking back and forth as if the movement might somehow shield her from the storm. Sam's horse slowed instinctively as he approached, sensing his rider's tension. Sam squinted through the rain, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He had encountered many travelers on the plains, but none like this. She looked young, perhaps in her early 20s, yet her face was marked with sorrow that seemed too heavy for someone her age. Sam felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Hey there," he called gently, raising a hand to keep her attention. The woman flinched at his voice but did not run. Her eyes, red from crying, met his briefly before she looked away again. Sam dismounted and led his horse closer. The rain soaked him instantly, but he hardly noticed. All that mattered was her. "Are you all right?" he asked. His voice was low and steady. She shook her head, tears mingling with the rain on her cheeks. Sam could see that she was scared, that she had been wandering in the storm for some time. The bundle she held was too small to contain much, and it seemed to be the only thing she had left of her life before this moment. He took a careful step closer, keeping his hands visible to show he meant no harm. "You can come with me. I have shelter nearby," he said. She hesitated, and Sam could sense the hesitation was not just fear of him but fear of trusting anyone again. He did not push her. Instead, he knelt slightly, lowering himself to appear less threatening. "It's raining hard. You can't stay out here." The woman's name was Ahuli, though Sam did not know that yet. She had lost her husband only days ago, in a skirmish that had left her completely alone. She had wandered the plains ever since, not knowing where to go, unable to speak much to anyone. Now, faced with this stranger, she felt a mixture of fear, suspicion, and though she would not admit it, even to herself, a faint glimmer of hope. Sam, recognizing her hesitation, made a choice that surprised even him. In a voice firm yet gentle, he said, "You're my wife." The words hung in the rain-filled air, strange and sudden, and for a moment neither of them moved. She blinked in disbelief, unsure if he was joking or serious. Sam, however, felt an unshakable certainty. He did not know why he said it, but he knew that in this world of danger and sorrow, he could offer her protection, and she could have a safe place with him. For a few tense moments, Ahuli simply stared at him. The rain fell harder, drumming against the leaves and splashing in the puddles. Finally, she spoke a few broken words, a mixture of her Apache language and faint English, trying to understand his meaning. Sam listened carefully, nodding and smiling reassuringly. He did not need her to speak perfectly. He only needed her to know that she was not alone anymore. Gently, he motioned for her to follow him. The cabin was not far, hidden among a small cluster of trees near the river bank. Sam took her bundle from her hands and carried it, careful not to jostle its contents. The journey through the mud and rain was slow, but he did not mind. For the first time in a long while, he felt a purpose that had nothing to do with cattle or the harshness of the land. His purpose was simply to bring her to safety. Inside the cabin, the air was warm and dry. Sam set a fire in the hearth, the flames licking the wet logs and filling the room with a soft, comforting glow. Ahuli stood by the doorway, dripping water onto the wooden floor. Sam handed her a blanket and gestured for her to sit by the fire. She hesitated, then allowed herself to sit, wrapping the blanket tightly around her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her bones, and she felt a small measure of relief from the storm outside and the storm inside her heart. Sam busied himself around the cabin, preparing a simple meal of beans and bread. He spoke little, letting the quiet companionship speak for itself. Occasionally, he would glance at Ahuli, who sat quietly, staring into the fire. He noticed the faintest signs of exhaustion in her posture, the deep sorrow in her eyes, and he felt a protective urge that he could not explain. He had always been a solitary man, yet this woman had stirred something in him that made him feel responsible for her well-being. As night fell, the storm outside continued. The wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls, and the rain pounded the roof. Yet inside, there was a fragile sense of safety. Sam gave her a small cup of warm water and sat beside her, careful to respect her space while remaining close enough to show he would not leave. Ahuli sipped the water slowly, her hands trembling. She had not felt cared for in days, perhaps weeks, and the warmth of the fire and the kindness of this stranger offered a balm to her sorrow. She finally spoke in a whisper, her words broken, but Sam understood the meaning. She was asking if she could stay, if she could be safe here, if she could trust him. Sam nodded, not needing to say much more. His earlier words, "You're my wife," were not a promise he could make lightly. But in that moment, they became a vow of protection. He would keep her safe from the dangers of the plains, from the loneliness, and from the grief that had weighed so heavily on her heart. Hours passed, and the storm gradually softened to a steady drizzle. Ahuli, exhausted, finally leaned back against the wall, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and let herself relax for the first time since the skirmish that had claimed her husband. Sam remained at the hearth, tending the fire, occasionally glancing at her with a quiet, unspoken reassurance. He knew that trust would take time, that fear would not vanish overnight. But he was willing to wait. The night stretched on, and the rain whispered against the roof like a lullaby. In that small, dimly lit cabin, two strangers, one a cowboy hardened by the harshness of the land, the other a widow hardened by loss, began a fragile journey together. There were no grand promises beyond the simple truth that one would care for the other. And that was enough to kindle a spark of hope in the darkness. Sam could not explain the sudden certainty that had made him call her his wife, but he felt it in his bones. This woman, drenched and trembling under an oak tree in the rain, had entered his life unexpectedly, and he could not imagine letting her go. And Ahuli, though weary and broken, felt a small flicker of trust. Perhaps, she thought, this man might not just be a stranger. Perhaps he could become a part of her life, a part of her healing, and a companion in a world that had been cruel and unforgiving. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the plains remained wild and empty. But inside the little cabin, a bond began to form. A bond born not of ceremony or declaration, but of courage, kindness, and the quiet understanding that sometimes, even in the darkest storms, someone can reach out and bring light. Days passed, and the rain finally gave way to clearer skies. The plains were still damp, but the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting golden light across the muddy trails. Inside the small cabin, the warmth of the fire and the gentle hum of life brought a quiet comfort to both Sam and Ahuli. Though they had only known each other for a few days, a fragile bond had begun to grow, a bond built on trust, shared silence, and the understanding that each had found safety in the other. Sam kept his routine steady. He tended to the horses, checked on the small herd of cattle nearby, and repaired fences that had been damaged by the storm. He moved with purpose, yet always made sure Ahuli was safe and comfortable. At first, she had been hesitant to help. Her grief weighed heavily, and she had not yet found the strength to perform the chores that life on the plains required. But Sam's patience and gentle guidance encouraged her. Slowly, she began to move again, learning to carry water, gather firewood, and tend to the small garden near the cabin. She taught Sam things in return. Though they spoke different languages, gestures, and broken words, she shared her knowledge of the land. She showed him which herbs could be used for medicine, how to track animals without startling them, and which plants could be safely eaten. Sam watched her carefully, realizing that her wisdom and resilience were remarkable. Even in the midst of her sorrow, she carried a quiet strength that inspired him. One morning, after a week of clear skies, Sam noticed Ahuli sitting quietly by the river, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand. She seemed lost in thought, staring at the rippling water, as if remembering someone who was no longer there. Sam approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "You miss him," he said softly, though he knew words might not be enough. She nodded, her lips trembling. Sam sat beside her in silence, letting the river's gentle sound speak where words could not. It was in these quiet moments that trust deepened. Sam did not need to fix her grief. He only needed to share it with her. And in doing so, she began to feel less alone. Their days settled into a rhythm. Sam taught her how to ride his horse, guiding her carefully until she could manage on her own. They worked the land together, planting vegetables and repairing fences. Ahuli began to smile more often, a small, hesitant smile at first, then brighter as the days went by. Laughter returned slowly, as if the cabin itself had been waiting for it. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, they worked together to mend a broken fence near the edge of the pasture. Ahuli lifted the wooden beams with surprising strength, and Sam could not help but admire her determination. The work was hard, but they encouraged each other, sharing small jokes and smiles that bridged the gap of language and past sorrows. "You're strong," Sam said with genuine admiration, wiping sweat from his brow. She nodded, a hint of pride in her eyes. She did not say much, but her quiet acknowledgement spoke volumes. The cowboy and the widow were becoming partners, not just in survival, but in life. Evenings were their time to rest and share stories. Though Ahuli's English was limited, she told Sam about her childhood, the traditions of her people, and her favorite memories with her late husband. Sam listened attentively, asking questions and learning the names of places, plants, and customs. In turn, he shared stories of his life on the plains, the hardships of cattle drives, and the small triumphs that made life worth living. Slowly, they built a shared history, piece by piece, filling the cabin with warmth, laughter, and understanding. Neighbors from nearby settlements began to notice the unusual pair. A cowboy with a rugged appearance, living with a young Apache widow, drew whispers and curious glances. Some were skeptical, questioning why Sam had taken her in, while others admired his courage. Sam paid little attention to gossip. His focus remained on Ahuli, on the bond that had grown stronger with each passing day. And Ahuli, once hesitant to trust, began to feel the comfort of acceptance not just from Sam, but from the knowledge that she could build a new life in this vast, open land. One particularly warm evening, Sam and Ahuli sat outside the cabin, watching the sun set in brilliant oranges and pinks. The sky reflected on the small river nearby, making it shine like liquid gold. Sam reached for her hand, a small, tentative gesture, and she did not pull away. The moment was quiet, simple, yet full of meaning. The bond they had forged in the rain had deepened into something enduring. "You're my wife," Sam said again, repeating the words he had first spoken in the storm. This time, the words were not an impulsive promise, they were a vow, a declaration of partnership, trust, and protection. Ahuli looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude, relief, and quiet joy. She nodded, and for the first time since the loss of her husband, she allowed herself to feel hope. Life on the plains was not without challenges. There were storms, occasional sickness in the herd, and the constant labor of survival. But together, they faced each challenge with determination. Ahuli grew stronger and more confident each day, learning not only the skills she needed to survive, but also the courage to dream of a life beyond grief. Sam, who had spent much of his life alone, discovered a new sense of purpose in caring for her, in protecting her, and in building a home where they could both belong. They shared small traditions that became their own. Every morning, they walked to the river to gather fresh water, laughing when one slipped on the muddy bank or splashed the other accidentally. In the evenings, they cooked meals together, sometimes experimenting with new ingredients and laughing when the food did not turn out perfectly. They built a rhythm, a life of simple joys and shared effort, each day weaving the threads of trust and companionship ever tighter. Ahuli began to help Sam care for the animals. She learned to ride the fastest horse in the herd, guide cattle along the trail, and handle a lasso with surprising skill. Sam was impressed. He had never met someone so resilient. Someone who could face loss and still find the strength to live fully again. Her laughter became a music that filled the cabin and even the open plains. One chilly night, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire and shared stories of the past. Sam spoke of his parents, of childhood adventures across the plains, and of times when life had been hard, but lessons had been learned. Ahuli shared tales of her people's traditions, of the dances, songs, and stories passed down through generations. The room glowed with the fire's light, but it was their connection that made it truly warm. Seasons began to change, and with spring came the renewal of the land. Flowers bloomed near the cabin, and the river ran clearer and stronger. Sam and Ahuli stood together on the ridge, looking out over the valley. The world stretched before them, full of possibilities. Sam took her hand in his again, and this time, there was no hesitation. She held it firmly, with trust and confidence. "You're my wife," Sam said one final time, his voice calm and full of certainty. Ahuli nodded, smiling, her eyes reflecting the sky above. They had come a long way from that rainy evening, from the first meeting under the oak tree when sorrow had filled her heart. Now, they faced the future together, partners in life, bound not by circumstance alone, but by the courage, patience, and care that had grown between them. The plains stretched endlessly around them, a vast, wild, and beautiful place. Together, Sam and Ahuli walked forward, riding the horses, tending the land, and living each day fully. Aware that life could be harsh, but also that love and trust could bloom in the most unexpected places. And as the sun set behind the distant mountains, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for the journey they had already shared.